Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you for joining the stream. It's now 3 p.m. Adelaide time. It's the second time we're going to be running the NCC19 residential webinar. Changes to the construction code happening in 3 weeks from now. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to allow everybody to come in to the stream in the first couple of minutes. And while we're waiting for everybody to come along, please let me know that you're here. Say hi in the chat. Also, let me know where you're from. We're really curious to see where everybody is tuning in from. There we go. Shiva, good to see you back. A loyal watcher of this webinar. I'm not entirely sure, Shiva, if you're coming here more times, whether I'm actually doing a poor job at explaining the changes or if you're just enjoying the webinar. So, but loving the support, so thanks for that. Also, keep in mind, everyone, there's going to be about a 4 to 5 seconds delay between the chat and the actual live stream. So it's not exactly live. I will also close the window because there are some motorcycles driving past my apartment building. Anyway, so let's see how many people we're going to have today, because we haven't really promoted this particular webinar a lot, and we also have obviously run this one already before, so we'll see how we're going. Hi Wayne, welcome here. Is there something available for our CBD points? Not at this moment, we're still working on it. The problem with CBD points is that you typically would have to prove that you've been actually in that particular workshop. By usually in physical meetings they use a attendance list. So obviously when it comes to a webinar, it's kind of hard to sort of prove that. So, but right now you've already put your name in the chat here. So we're still working on sorting the CPD out. So with a bit of luck, maybe some of the webinars we've been running and people have been joining, we can still let them know afterwards that the CPD points will be valid. So officially at this point not. But we'll keep on running these webinars for another 6 to 8 weeks at least. So there's definitely going to be opportunities to get some CBD points on this, hopefully very, very soon. All right, so we're going to be running for about half an hour at most, and we'll be talking about residential code changes only. And hope everybody's doing well. Like I said, if you've just joined the live stream, we're just about to start. Let me know that you're here. Leave a message in the chat. I'm currently in day 12 of a 14-day mandatory home isolation. So this is just about as much interaction I get with other people. So please let me know when you're here in the chat, so that I know that you guys are here. And obviously, if you have any questions, make sure that you leave them in the chat. I might not be able to immediately answer them during the webinar. But under SUHO Australia, I've got a chat moderator that knows all about this code change as well. So they'll be able to communicate and answer your questions while I'm talking. All right, so let's get into it. We've got a couple of people now here. Welcome. Like I said, leave us a note in the chat if you're here. And if you have any questions, let us know. All right, so first off, we start with talking about when is this change actually going to affect us. Now, last week when I was talking about this, that was 4 weeks away. Now we're 3 weeks away. So it's getting really, really close. The code change has actually been introduced already back in May 1st, 2019. However, there's a whole year of grace period in which we were still allowed to use the NCC19 code. Now, what it actually meant is that the majority of the market was basically sitting back using the old code as is, and waited for the very last moment to actually jump on this new code. And perhaps some of you guys that are currently in this webinar hear for the first time about this code change, or at least the details of it. So if that's the case, by the way, I'd love to know. So leave that in the chat message. If this is the very first time you're going to hear anything technical, detailed about the code changes, I'd love to know. It's been very surprising to me, coming from the Netherlands 1.5 years ago, starting at SUHO, that the government basically did very little to help the industry getting ready for this new code change, and basically left it to the industry and ESD consultants such as ourselves to try and sort it out. So I'm hoping that today will give you some information that you can use to get ready for the code change. So any project that applies for building permit on May 1 or afterwards officially falls under the NCC19 regulation. That's the official rule. Now there's two buts to that. The first but is, okay, there has been some rumors that the grace period potentially could be extended. As of today, there's no official signs that anything will change, but we don't know. It's NCC19 meeting COVID-19. I'm not entirely sure how that mix is going to, how that blend is going to play out. So we'll have to wait and see in a couple of weeks if it's really going to happen. But at this stage, it's still going on as expected. The second but is that the building surveyor still, as always, has a lot of power to, in fact, deviate from this. Which means that if you have a project in the books that is currently running, but is not going to be ready for building permit application quite yet on May 1, you might go to your building surveyor and ask them, look, I've done the majority of the work on this side of May 1. Are you happy for me to continue under NCC16? And I think considering the situation, we've already seen multiple building surveyors agreeing to that. So that's probably the first and an important tip to give to you guys in this webinar. Go to your building surveyor if you have current project in the books that you're not entirely sure about which code they will use, and ask for permission to use the NCC16 code to continue your project. We typically see if you have town planning permit already, that should normally be, they would normally agree to use the old code as well. So that's tip 1, May 1, building permit application is the cutoff, but talk to your building surveyor to make sure. All right. Before we continue, we need to get the terminology right a little bit. I'm obviously not entirely sure how many people in this webinar know anything about this. There's 3 ways to get compliance with the National Construction Code for residential homes. The first one is deemed to satisfy, which is hardly ever used, at least in our practice, and we've done over 60,000 ratings. It essentially has 2 different methods that we typically use, which is the 6 stars, which most of you will know and have heard about. But more often than not, we use the verification method, which is also called V2622, or the performance-based method. So to give you an idea, 85% of the ratings we've done historically use the verification method as opposed to 15% using the 6 stars rating. So it just gives you a bit of an idea. The verification method is very highly relied upon in a lot of the construction industry, especially in WA and in South Australia. Why is that so? Because the 6-star rating basically asks you to upgrade your design to get to a certain level, 6 stars. The verification method allows us to make a reference building, and we essentially try to make that reference building perform as bad as possible, because we have a lot of flexibility to change the window sizes and all that, so that our actual building has to simply be better than that reference building in order to comply. What does that actually mean? Well, in reality, it means that you can currently get houses that are otherwise 2 or 3 stars still through compliance with relative ease using that verification method, because of that flexibility in changing the reference building. Is that a good thing? Probably not. So the government introduced this loophole to the 6 stars, and essentially a lot of the industry has become addicted to that loophole, and will have big troubles now that the loophole is essentially being filled up again and taken out. It's still there, but we can no longer actually change the reference building. So that reference building is set and has certain values and certain features to it, such as a 2.4 meter high ceiling. If your house, the home you're building or have designed has higher ceilings than that, you're already getting into trouble straight away. So essentially where you were kind of comparing apples to apples in the verification method, now you might have a pineapple that you have to compare to an apple, which is going to be pretty much impossible practically, or the specifications that you need to be better than your reference building are going to be so high that you simply, it's impossible to use. So in practice, that means that come May 1, 2020, all of the houses are going to be using that 6 stars method. Now, people in Victoria, New South Wales will be very used to that 6-star system. That's where they have been using it predominantly in Australia. But now that's going to be a pretty level playing field across the country. Everybody's going to go to 6 stars, except for Queensland and the Northern Territory. So Queensland is still staying with the old code, 2009, I believe, at this moment. So they can still use that verification method. So So in summary, the verification method, highly dependent, highly relied upon in the market to still be able to get away with single glazing and all that, is essentially being taken out, that loophole, and rendered ineffective. So now 6 stars becomes the new baseline. We think it's a good thing, and I think for anybody watching who is, either an architect or builder that's trying to do, good quality builds, this is a positive change, because it means that all your competitors are going to have to get to that minimum standard as well. So you don't have to compete anymore against those, builders and architects that design and build relatively simple houses with very low specifications to keep them cheap. No, they're all going to have to go to that same level as you hopefully are already. So that's a good thing. However, so even for those markets that are already used to the 6-star rating system, such as Victoria and New South Wales, there is a little extra criteria that has been introduced, which are the heating and cooling loads. So in addition to the 6 stars, you now need to meet a certain limit of heating and cooling load, a bandwidth, essentially. And what that means is, you probably need to know what a 6-star means. A 6-star essentially means nothing else but the combined sum of the heating and the cooling load together. So megajoules per square meter per annum. So that combined gives you a certain number, and that gives you a certain star rating. What that meant is that you could potentially have homes that were very heating or very cooling dominant, and still together summed up to be a 6-star home. That's what the government wants to avoid, because we're trying to reduce the amount of mechanical heating and cooling that we need to pump into the houses. So depending on your climate zone, there's going to be different heating and cooling load limits, and as you can see on the screen, those can be quite different for different climate zones. There's about 8 standard sort of climate zones that a lot of people know about in Australia. Victoria being predominantly 6, Adelaide being 5, and the hills in Adelaide being 6. But in Netters, the software that we use, those have been further narrowed down into over 65 different little climate zones, and every single one of those has their own heating and cooling load limits that we have to check in on. So good to know. Moving forward, no verification method. You can rest assured it's going to be, unless you're having a small square box that you're building, you pretty much have to go 6 stars. And if you do go 6 stars, you're going to have to go heating and cooling load limits as well. It means that you might run into 6.1 or 6.2 before you actually also meet the heating and cooling load limits. This does not sound like much, but once you've got to 6 stars, a lot of the builders will have already exhausted most of the standard options. So then when you need to get that 1 point or 2 point of stars, you still have to get quite creative in terms of upgrades in order to get there. So that's obviously something that we're trying to avoid. And the way we're trying to avoid it is by telling you guys, giving you some tips and tricks on how to potentially, what are the things that you need to be mindful of. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to beat a piece of software. Now, that software is a good software. It's pretty accurate in its simulations, but at the same time, the software obviously cannot cover every single type of design. It's going to have its flaws. It's going to have certain things that make sense. It's going to have things that don't make sense. So if we understand and if we know what the software likes and doesn't like, we can obviously prepare for that, and we can manage the expectations of our clients in the process. So when I look at this sheet that you currently have on the screen, there's a few things on there that the software very likes. So, for instance, living zones to the north, that's excellent. But we're obviously very well aware that you have your designs that potentially have views to the west or whatever, and they might have living areas not facing north. That's fine. We're not telling you here what to do. We're just telling you, okay, if that's the case, then you need to tell your client you're probably going to have to offset somewhere else, meaning probably higher specifications in your glazing and your wall if you want to have that. So anyone can have anything they like if they're willing to, make sure that they have the right specifications to do so. So a few other tips that the software likes, the separating the habitable and non-habitable spaces with doors always works well. The eave depth and shading devices have a big impact, so especially external shading. We cannot model stuff like drapes or so you need to, not every type of shading can be modeled in the software. So particularly we're looking at external fixed shading devices that can be controlled. Also good to know, the software favors 180 square meter or smaller, pretty small houses. So if you've joined in this webinar and you're an architect, good chance that you're making houses or designing houses that are much larger than 180 square meters. That's okay. You just need to be mindful of the fact that means that the software doesn't favor it. It means that you're going to automatically look at some higher specifications than perhaps your typical standard home. So it's again about managing that perception, managing that expectation moving forward. Also, minimizing the external wall area. It's another good example. And when I say minimize external wall area, I'm talking about those, walls that go with all the little nooks and all the crannies. The more we do that, the software just doesn't like it. So we're trying to minimize that external wall area by keeping it as straightforward as possible. Again, it might not always be possible, but where you can, try to keep these kind of things that we've got on the screen in mind. An example. Always like to bring in examples because it makes it a little bit tangible for everyone that's watching. So this is a multi-story and very large, a decent sized home. It's a new build and it's 3 stories. Now, the 2 things I would like to do with this example is not only to give you guys an idea about how is this sitting under the old code and the new code, but also like to give you a bit of a glimpse into SUHO's reality. What happens when you send us through a plan? What happens is that we actually take the plan and we model up the floor plan, straight from the plan into a piece of software called First Rate 5. And all the different areas in the house get a different label attached to them to determine, what's the type of activity in that room, and when people typically occupy it, what type of activities do they do. So gray, for instance, would be an uninhabitable space. That's the garage in here. Green might be your living and kitchen area, and you've got your bedrooms and so forth. So everything gets their own little label attached to it. And what label something has is important. So that's also something that you need to be mindful of when you design something in terms of, what are the type of labels that you use, and are all the rooms that I have in mind, are they already set in terms of after the build is completed? Might there still be some flexibility in terms of what you're going to do in that room? If you're not entirely sure, you might just want to stay away from already putting a name to it, because if you put a name to it, that might affect you negatively. Another thing that you need to keep in mind, for instance, in this particular design, it's a 3-story design. That means that we need to model every single house around it standard as 3 stories as well. That's mandatory. Unless we get details from the architects, or we can find out on Google Maps that the neighboring houses are maybe double story or even single story. That's obviously going to affect how much shading we're getting from the surrounding houses and such things. So what I'd like to say is that as many details we can get, the better. So make sure that you provide as many details on your plans in terms of the surrounding houses as well. Also let us know, what are the manufacturers of the windows that you're looking to use. If you have it, we can already model that. If you know exactly what type of flooring you're going to use in the different rooms, let us know. Why? If you don't know, you can safely assume we need to consider worst case scenario. Whereas maybe you don't need to if we would know that kind of detail. Under the NCC19, it's important to give the ESD consultants a lot more detail at the very early stage, as much as possible, so we can utilize that to make the compliance map as accurate as possible to what actually is going to happen. Now, this design that you're looking at right now comfortably passed compliance in the NCC19, comfortably, using the verification method that I spoke about before. So we didn't have to upgrade much on the specification that the client and the architect wanted to use. Everything was just fine. Now, what did we do? We actually modeled this now under the NCC19 regulation. The initial star rating on it was just 2.7 stars. So bear with me, we're not even halfway to where we need to be. And our consultants then went into the design and started changing a lot of things about it, as you can see in all these bullet points. So we changed the glazing to really, really good double glazing. We even changed the size of the windows, which people are not happy with usually. Bulk insulation to the internal walls. So really significant changes to the actual original design. And even with all that, we only managed to get it to 4.9 stars. So still a full star off the actual required 6 stars. Not to mention the heating and cooling load. I've not even taken that into consideration. So obviously we don't want to scare anyone, but we definitely want to also make sure that everybody understands that, especially for larger designs, you cannot wait for building permit to go to your ESD consultant. It simply is not going to fly. There's risk of us having to go back to you, like with this design, we would have to go back to the client and say we need to change the design. And what we really want to try and avoid for you guys is you making a design, showing it to the client falls in love with the design, shows it off to all their family and friends, although, that might have to happen digital nowadays. That used to be the barbecue back then. But you know what I mean. They get excited about it. They love it. If you have to come back a few months later and say, listen, sorry, I can't get this through energy compliance. There's no way unless we need to use triple glazing. So we need to change the design. A surprised client is usually an unhappy client. So our advice would be, in the concept design, already give us your design. And then from there, we can already give you some advice in terms of what are the things and the features in this design that are going to be positively affecting your rating, and what are the things that are going to negatively affect your rating, and give you a bit of an idea. Shiva, your question about Speckle. Speckle is doing daylight analysis, but daylight analysis is really only relevant from a compliance perspective for commercial jobs, so not on residentials. But I'll leave our moderator to answer those questions in more detail. But I know you get the idea from this example. What used to pass quite comfortably before might not pass that comfortably anymore. Anything that used single glazing before, you can safely assume that single glazing, you're not going to be able to get away with that moving forward. So here's a little summary on what are these standard design advices that we give people, just because, again, we want to make sure you understand what the software favors. You can deviate from that any way you like, but if you do, just make sure that you understand that there's some consequences to that. So living areas to the north, that is always a big benefit. If you can manage that, that would be great. Obviously, 20 to 30% glaze to floor ratio would be ideal. That's what the software likes. So, having floor to ceiling windows all around, it's going to be probably pretty tough to get that through compliance unless you're really using exceptionally good window specifications, which equals a lot of money. Just basically try to keep these kind of tips in mind when you're designing. I've not put these tips in because I'm running through all of these, because you guys can read perfectly fine. Just know that you can always rewatch this webinar on our YouTube if you want to comfortably run through some of the slides and read some of the things that are on it. We have prepared a special piece of software. Our software development team has taken our 60,000 plus ratings that we've done historically and developed an artificial intelligence algorithm that is going to allow us to predict a star rating with very minimum amount of information. So your ceiling insulation, your roof colors, your type of wall construction, window orientation, some square meters on your windows. So in a matter of 10 minutes, you can get an understanding, or we can get an understanding for you about where your current star rating is. This software is already at a 0.3 accuracy at the moment, and it's going to allow you to get at least close to 6 stars before you start looking at compliance and all that. So this is a very unique piece of software developed by the SUHO software development team, but we've split it up in its own startup, Hubble, that is going to run separately from SUHO. And for those who are interested to know more about Hubble, next week, Tuesday, I think at 10 in the morning somewhere, 10:30, we have a webinar about Hubble and a demonstration about Hubble from Marco, our colleague, the manager of the software development team. So that's a really exciting webinar that I can definitely recommend to you guys to watch on Tuesday, because this is definitely going to be the future of energy ratings moving forward. It's going to change the market around completely. So really exciting stuff. and something that we're looking forward to use under the NCC19 code as well to help our clients. So that was it for the content side of this webinar. Pretty straightforward, I hope. I hope it was informative and that this gives you a rough idea about what's going to happen and what are the tips and tricks that you can use in order to prevent surprises down the track. We run a lot of different webinars these days. This week there were only 4. Next week we're going to be running about 6. So keep an eye on our LinkedIn page for the program with the exact times and dates. And this week we have tomorrow morning, I'll be running my colleague Tom will be running a commercial energy NC19 changes workshop, which is also really interesting to know. Those changes will be even more stringent impactful than the residential changes. And I can also highly recommend Thursday at 11 Melbourne time, understanding air tightness testing. It's a very interesting topic as well. That's been relatively new to Australia. It's been very common already in Europe. To give you guys a bit of an idea about what does air tightness testing mean, what does it do, why is it beneficial for your homes. So especially we have one of the specialists in Australia inside the firm, Jessica, my colleague, she will be running that webinar, so I can highly recommend that one as well. So like I said, you can run to our YouTube and also subscribe to it. You can rewatch the webinars that we've run. And keep an eye on our LinkedIn. You can also add the actual webinar calendar to your own calendar by subscribing to it. So if you're using Gmail or Outlook, you can actually add it. Shiva, I hope that you enjoyed your probably 3rd or 4th webinar. Let me know if we're improving or going down. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to answer them now. I hope your question got answered, Shiva, about Speckle. The Speckle is a tool that was developed for facade calculations for commercial buildings. We've developed our own internal facade calculator. Those are pretty much the only 2 tools we know about in the market at the moment to do commercial facade calculations. If you want to know more about that, I would advise you to tune in to the NCC19 Changes commercial tomorrow morning. So just want to see if anybody has any more questions. It doesn't seem that way. In which case, I thank you all for joining this afternoon. I hope everyone is doing all right working from home and enjoying the amount of webinars that we're having these days. Not only us, but also a lot of other companies. It's a great opportunity to upskill yourself, get a lot of extra knowledge in. And I hope everybody will be ready and set to go when the NC19 changes coming in 3 weeks from now. If you do need any help or any assistance or you have any more questions that were not answered here, then you can obviously contact us through the website or the contact page, or contact me directly. You can find my details on my LinkedIn page. Shiva, there are definitely we're working on some webinars on potentially on Design Builder, but as you can understand, that's a little bit more tricky and a bit more technical. But also know that our program is still pretty straightforward this week, but we'll be adding a lot of different contents for webinars in the coming weeks. I know that next week we're going to have something about designing the house of the future, which might be a really interesting one. We've designed a 10-star home. So what does that actually mean and how do you design such a home? So that's going to be run next week on Thursday. So that will be also really interesting. So there's going to be a lot of different topics coming up in the coming weeks, Shiva. Design Builder is no doubt going to be one of them. But we wanted to make sure, because the NC19 changes are so close from here, that the first weeks we wanted to really push out a lot of webinars around the NCC19 changes first before we get into some other topics. Alright, so with that I'm going to end the stream in a matter of seconds. I am very grateful for all your support and for everybody joining in today. And again, I hope to see you soon again in one of the other webinars that we run. And I hope that this was everything that was informative for you all and helpful moving forward towards May 1. That's all from me for today. Have a great day, everyone, and a good week, and see you guys soon.